Cool. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for yet another AdFocus live conversation. I'm very excited about this panel just because of the range, I think, of experience and references and insights that we'll be sharing across with you guys. So my guest, Gordon Cook, needs very little introduction, and I'm going to give a shout out to all the Vega campuses that have tuned in. Hello. Gordon Cook is a wealth of knowledge, experience, one of the co-founders of Vega. And I'm very excited about how he is going to give perspective and I guess speak life into the future, drawing from where he's come from, experienced advertising in the Mad Men days. And then we've also got Mbali. Mbali is incredibly dynamic. Even now, setting up the conversation, we're already talking about traveling across the continent, and she's going to give us perspective, referencing her work at Unilever, buying digital media across the continent. And so she will give us a lens. She'll help us cast an eye on the potential of the continent and how we could look at our industry differently. And then Mosito, thank you so much for making it at this time. Mosito's traveled across time zones and is tuning in with us from Brooklyn. Thank you very much, Mosito. And he's going to give us perspective from someone that is rooted in South Africa, but based elsewhere. And I heard him say, which I found quite interesting, Mosito, that you hadn't actually done the agency round as yet because you'd come from the client side. So for me, you're going to break two silos, actually. One is around a myopic view of the industry and how we can really globalize our perspective, but also the transition, I think, from client to agency. So right there, let's get into it. I'm going to start with you, Gordon. And I'm going to say, first question, the fundamental difference that you observe from the days when you were active and started out in the industry, evolving into an educator and developing skills within the industry. What do you observe as having changed over the years?
Thank you, Tumi. I think some dramatic changes. First of all, the word advertising, and I used to head up the advertising school. I think advertising as a concept is past a sell-by date. And we've sort of shifted from advertising to marketing communication.
Right.
And now I think we speak about integrated brand communication. So I think we've really moved away from this set of fixed media on which we advertise, TV, radio, print, and it's got far more complex, and we've become very much more centered in communicating brand. And one of our panel members, Unilever, has done an outstanding job of communicating brand. So big shift. And that's why I started Vega, which was to put a focus on brand rather than advertising, but brand communication.
Oh, wow. Mbali, I'm actually going to kick it to you then, because Gordon actually references what Unilever has done, right? And a key observation for me in the time that we are in is actually the I'm going to call it the end, I think, or the evolution of the 30-second spot. Yeah. And for someone that purchases media, digital media, I'm going to use that as a springboard. Do you think that the role of the 30-second spot is still significant? And what else, I think, should we be thinking about looking at from a digital perspective?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Gordon was saying, right? That we are in an age where it is about brands and the value that brands add. So I think I think it was in around 2016 where I was engaging with someone and they were asking a question around what would advertising and marketing look like in 2020? And I mean, this was 4 years ago, right? and
when I listen to 2020, I still get like
it's crazy. It's crazy. And my answer to them was, marketing in 2020 won't be about targeting consumers. It'll be about value creation, about connections, and about moments. So those three things: value creation, connections, and moments. And winning brands will be those that can create valuable and relevant moments using data. So I think the springboard of that, I mean, whether we're in that space or not, probably in certain areas we are in 2020, but I think that becomes the opportunity, that this proximity to human beings. I think for the first time, we have such proximity to human beings. And I think my curiosity with our industry is to say, how do we become more human as we create communication, particularly on the continent that we're on? There's a quote from Steve Biko that says, the greatest gift that Africa will give to the world is providing the world a more human face. What does that actually look like for us to create in that kind of way, to hold our own humanity as people that are creating, very much recognizing the humanity of the people who we are meaningfully serving. So I think that for me is something that we need to engage. Just as we were coming onto the main call, we were talking about this concept of Ubuntu, and Mosito was talking about how he's seen that across the continent. And I think that's such a power that we have. That's such a carrying, it's such momentum that I don't know that we necessarily tap into as much as creators on the continent.
Right. So actually, on that aspect of humanity, Mosito, you and I, when we had our initial briefing conversation, we spoke about how we are actually more connected than we realize, especially the time that we are in due to COVID-19 and how it's impacted us all. And I think sometimes we forget that when we're so focused on our world, right? Yeah. So what has been your experience of our connectedness from where you are now, from your vantage point now?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like the one glaring thing has been people's, we've had a hard look at mortality, right? Like, I think a lot of us, especially like the younger guys, like we've always thought that we're going to be here forever, but I think, especially living in New York City when COVID hit early March and just the sheer numbers of people that are passing away. I mean, I lived in a building and within the space of 2 weeks, we had 3 people die in that building. So like you're immediately confronted with the fragility of life. And I think what that has done is that it's definitely like banded a lot of people together, across racial lines, across, social classes. Like in New York City, we had this thing at 7 p.m., people are outside the windows clapping and just thanking people that are working in the front line. So I think people definitely had a relook at the humanity and were confronted with the fact that there's a lot more that brings us together than what society and what television and what every other brand says we're different. So I think for me, like that has been the greatness of this pandemic, the people banding together. And then you look at stuff like the George Floyd movement, like George Floyd, in terms of its global impact, does not happen if COVID doesn't happen, right? Because I mean, before that, Tamir Rice had passed away, Eric Garner, but nothing has galvanized the world to the scale that George Floyd passing away has done. And you would say COVID had a lot to play with that because people had to confront their own mortality. And for the first time in a long time, people across different races, they saw the urgency of, Black people having said Black Lives Matter. So I think that's what I've seen. So it's definitely been an eye-opener. Like I said, living in New York City where in the peak of this, 900 people are dying daily, and like me being so far away from home, like I was confronted with my own mortality, you know what I mean? So like, so it was a lot more urgent for me.
Wow. I want to double click on the movements and I think about it as the emotional state of the world. How does that translate in work? How has that fundamentally, impacted how you work? And in a very practical way, have you reorganized and how have you reorganized? I think the context for me is also learning about adaptability. One of the awards that we have in the AdFocus selection this year, we've created a special agency or adaptability award in response to COVID-19. So how has the adaptation taken place, Mosito, and how you work right now?
I think it was a seamless one. I mean, I'll speak for the place that I work at. I think D5 like reacted very quickly. Like within 5 days of the office having been shut down, people got sent laptops. Some people flew out to Australia. So like I think what it did, it showed us that the concept of brick and mortar and going to office is going to be obsolete. You know, like in the next 5 years or even the next year. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm at a place where we're only going back to the office in June 2021. So I think.
Wow.
But yeah, in terms of adaptability, I think people definitely. I mean, in Nike, we used to say there's no finish line. Like you adapt, you evolve immediately. So I think that's what's happened. Like people, literally, like they moved into this whole working from home concept, and like they took it, like dog to water. So it's been an interesting one. But I will say that working from home is definitely, I think, impugned on the quality of time that I had with my daughter. You know, I mean, like I'm at home 10 hours a day, but I'm literally only spending about 30 minutes of those 10 hours with my daughter. So like there is a counter argument to, like having adapted to the working from home setting.
Yeah, compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
Being able to. So Gordon, I want to ask about this brick and mortar notion. As a co-founder of Vega, I mean, the dependencies on brick and mortar kind of establishments. Now we are moving into a future that is possibly virtual, right? More virtual certainly than it was before. So from your perspective, what should we be taking moving forward? What's the potential to expand, I think, even skills development in a virtual way? Is there potential? And most of all, is there value?
Well, in terms of the education component, there's been an increasing demand by students to get back to face-to-face. But I do believe that freelancing and networks of freelancing workers will be the future. And having these huge fancy advertising offices will become a thing of the past. So I will go to Tumi for events. I'll go to Mosito for some brand advice, or I'd go to Mbali for brand advice. So I think clients are going to benefit extraordinarily by being able to cherry pick specific skill sets. And this really suits the millennials. Millennials generally dislike working in ad agencies, from my perspective. They felt they weren't respected as young people because ad agencies have been run by older people, usually white, and most young people have not easily embraced working in agencies.
Wow. So two questions for me that emanate from that. One, I'd like to kick to Mbali, the idea of the one-stop shop from a client perspective. Gordon talks about having the option to cherry pick competencies and skills moving forward. How does that work for you in your client world? I saw you nodding, as he was speaking. So I want to understand how that is more valuable, and is it necessarily more pragmatic? So, what's the impetus for that?
Yeah, I think I was nodding because it's a very practical provocation to conversations we've been having for a while, right? We've been talking about this concept of the validity of the agency model. And what does the evolution of the agency model start to look like? And I think for me, in considering this question, I was like, actually, what do we have to learn from the environment that we exist in? There's so much to learn from the tech ecosystem. So the other half of what I do is working with startups across the continent to help us on building technology. And if we were to build out a way for marketing communications is there's something we can learn from design thinking, in terms of creating in that very iterative way, because advertising and communication is still very us focused. This is the idea, this is the big idea, this is what we believe will resonate, etc. But how do you evolve that? And I love what Gordon is saying, because then it means everybody is a lot freer to kind of be, what does fluidity look like in this industry, and how do we allow for a lot more things to emerge? Because I think when there is more fluidity, you give base and you give opportunity for many more things to emerge as valuable than we might not have when we're very focused on, this is kind of our creds document and this is what we create. I look at one of the agencies that I really enjoy watching, which is Dentsu in Japan.
Right.
And what they do is they've completely changed what they are. They're a business, like venture creating business, but they're an ad agency. One of the projects that they worked on for their client Toyota, instead of creating, a beautiful 60-second spot, they went and created a venture that was related to these tiny, tiny little cars to address the issue of traffic in Japan, and specifically in Tokyo. And the ad agency, the creative agency, was the one that led that process. And what they did is they connected to different skills that they may have had outside of their networks to actually make that happen. So this whole idea of bringing in an ecosystem and seemingly disparate skills together to add more value, I think is something that's quite valuable for us to think about.
Wow, that's quite powerful. I want to go back to the second point, right, that I picked up from Gordon's example. Sharing from my own experience, Mosito, I'd like to bring you in as well on this one. I had a running joke for a while about how I could not be convinced to get back into an ad agency. I was on a very deliberate mission to not be in an advertising agency, even though that's what I'm trained for. And there was in my experience, there was an absence of humanity, if I can put it that way. And so for a long time I resisted. Mosito, I want to ask you about your lived experience now, having made the transition from a client side and a very significant brand at that, very cause and orientated and purposeful, and now getting into the agency universe. What are you experiencing as a shift?
I think the big shift that I've experienced, and obviously being the fact that I am new in the agency space, having been brand, like you said, is definitely there's a less emphasis on ego, right? At Droga 5, we always say, like, no assholes here, like you're a human first, right? And I mean, David says it all the time. Yeah, because I mean, you're right, because like the old days of advertising has always been like the alpha male, Caucasian male, like you have to be a jerk to make it in this industry. So I think a lot of people have suffered, and like work has suffered, and like I think the agency has lost a lot of great talent because of those toxic environments that have existed. So at Droga, we definitely like are on the side of empathy, humanity, and I think if you create that kind of environment, like we talk about a psychological safety, right? Like a place where people, they don't have to self-filter to, you know what I mean, like to thrive in those spaces. So for me, that's been the one massive shift that I've experienced, having been on the brand side, because I have worked with a lot of like jerky agency people, you know what I mean, like so like and I definitely yeah, absolutely. And I, to be honest, like when I joined the agency, I definitely had my guard up, but like I was literally like looking up for like who this joke's gonna be. But you know, in the year that I've been there, I've been fortunate enough that I worked at a place where they really put the human and the empathy ahead of people's ego. So that's definitely done well, and I think it's also indicative in the quality of work that's come out of Droga in the last 2 to 3 years.
Gordon, I want to ask again. I'm enjoying how we keep going back to this concept of humanity. First of all, why on earth was it necessary to be like alpha male? What was that about? And moving forward, how are we pragmatically translating the humanity, I think, into the way we work, even in the way that we educate and build competencies, Gordon. I want to ask about that. How's that manifesting? But why was it that way to begin with?
Well, I think, good question. To me, I think that the concept of advertising really is about chest beating. It's about boasting. And,
right.
and of course, that really isn't communication. And that's why Mbali's expertise of digital communication is definitely going to become the way, because it's a two-way communication, as opposed to me just beating my chest in a 60-second TV ad. And I think also the industry was driven by some very brilliant people, and it has attracted brilliant people, but a lot of them with huge egos. And this notion that we do advertising to win awards really became very toxic, incredibly toxic.
Yeah.
And ad agencies, I think a lot of them started to think that they're celebrities. But meanwhile, they're just being paid to communicate by a client. And amidst all this, accounting firms saw a big opportunity to say, okay, I think we can better advise clients on communication because we understand the value chain of business. Ad agencies generally have been very dismissive of clients as people who don't have a creative cell in their brain. But
you should see Mbali's face. Mbali, please speak for the clients. Sorry, Gordon. Let me let you finish, but I had to acknowledge Mbali's response.
And I think we're very myopic in not seeing the whole value chain. So, for example, the solution is always advertising. But the solution, in my experience, is, I would even go to suffice to say, more than 50%, we need to work on the people in the client's organization. What is their culture like? What's their value system like? What's the loyalty level of a client? Because you can do all the advertising you want. If you have a leaking bucket, that when the advertising succeeds and the demand for the product and service results, it'll just fall out of a leaking bucket if the service levels aren't right. If we take the banking sector as a good example, that spends multi-millions on advertising, but you go into most of the banks and it's about as exciting as a brick.
Dear. Right. So I'm gonna read some of the questions because I think they flow very well into this conversation, and I'm gonna kick it to the entire panel. I've got a question here from Yanga. Yanga, please pardon me if I butcher your surname. I'm not sure if it's G or Gi, but the question you ask is, do you think the context of 2020 has put a stop on creativity for brands in general? Mbali, I want to start with you because you are the proverbial client in this forum.
Yeah, I think, there's a quote, I think it's by Steve Jobs that says, creating and driving impact in the 21st century will be about connecting creativity and technology. But I'd like to even press that a bit further, linking to what we've been talking about. It's creativity, technology, and humanity is where it's probably going to hinge. I think 2020 is requiring even more creativity than what we have thought of before. And I think what we have the opportunity, the invitation to us as people in the industry is to say, how do we even rethink what we mean by creativity, right? Because we immediately think 60 seconds, but can lion, like that's what we think, like a beautiful, big idea, emotional concept or whatever. But someone I used to work with, she said something quite powerful. She said, one powerful insight can create 1,000 ideas.
Wow.
And I think there's that opportunity. So what is the current environment teaching us? What is emerging from the current environment that we can then build meaningful things off of? What are the tensions that the current environment is bringing us to? So I think I think there's even more creativity required now. And 100% to what Gordon was saying, the reason I was nodding my head so much is what clients need right now are business partners. I need somebody who's going to walk with me in terms of building my business. E-commerce in Africa, overall, I mean, I was looking at data a week ago, has grown at about 40% year on year. And the estimate is that it has accelerated the e-commerce journey, COVID specifically, by 4 to 5 years. So it would have taken us 5 years to get to the point where we are now in the past 5 months. So what does that mean for you as an agency, where this is where the growth is going to come from in terms of e-commerce? What are you doing? A few years ago, I was working in a previous company, and we gave the creative agency and the media agency accountability for the full e-commerce sales. So the CMO gave us and said, I need you to drive X amount of money, revenue, digital, show me how you're going to do it, and you guys are responsible for the full execute. They hated it, absolutely hated it, because all they wanted to do was create beautiful ads. And we said, okay, cool, we can only pay you, we're going to hold a certain amount of your money until we've been able to meet this objective. And we were able to be so much more creative within those constraints. And how do we think about the constraint of COVID as an enabler and as an opportunity for emergence for us? So yeah, creativity more than ever is needed.
Okay, so I'm going to cast this question again to the entire panel.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room around awards. What I'm hearing nuanced as well is the creative awards are great. Yes, we get it, but we need to be looking further, deeper, wider. We need to evolve from that as well. We're an awards platform, right? AdFocus Awards. Do you think there's a place for awards, and how could we or should we be evolving in that space? That's always the elephant in the room, right? Says a jury chairperson. Anyone can take the question.
Gordon, do you want to have a stab?
Gordon?
I think the issue to me is, what do we award? I mean, a heart surgeon who does a successful set of operations isn't looking for an award.
Right.
I mean, why do we have to acknowledge what we're being paid to do? Having said that, I think we should award innovation. And I think we should put far more emphasis on awarding campaigns that have a measurable value-adding consequence, that they're more human. If we take the famous Unilever campaign of one of their soaps that promotes hand washing.
Yes, we're allowed to call it Lifebuoy.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Lifebuoy. I mean, that is the most extraordinary thing. And at that time, that should have won amazing awards. So I think we've got to relook at the criteria for the set of awards, because we all know ad agencies spend a whole set of months just creating communication to win awards. I mean, what is that about?
Mosito, you having been a client, like I said, Nike being so highly recognized for their campaigns, and now working in an agency that is bar setting in terms of creativity, right? Let's talk about the role of awards in your universe right now. What's the value that you see in awards?
Yeah, I mean, let's not kid ourselves, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, awards are what keeps the lights on, you know what I mean? Like, awards are what generate new business, you know what I mean? Like, they keep you relevant. Like, the kids coming from ed school, they want to be, you know what I mean? Like, you
Yes.
attract the best talent by the number of awards that you have, you know? But I think on the other side of the continuum, you have to mix that up with some social goodwill, you know what I mean? So, like, you look at guys like Nike, like, a well-awarded brand, but then you look at the social activism, you know, like the stuff they did back in Colin Kaepernick when he was ostracized by the NFL. All the league owners are shutting him out, like literally curtailing his career. And then you look at it 2 years down the line, Nike's vindicated, right? Because the whole world is taking a knee now, you know what I mean? So,
right.
To Gordon's point, I think awards, there is a place for them. Like you're right, like we're not tapping ourselves on the back industry. So like I said, the awards definitely keep the lights on, but I do feel like there has to be like a spread of what you bring into the world. So like right now, I think we live in a climate where I think consumers want to see brands doing stuff that they embody. You know, I'm like, I want to spend my hard-earned money with a brand that embodies my philosophy on life. You know, I'm like, I don't care if the latest Samsung gadget does it, but like, I want to feel good by spending my money knowing that, you know, like you're contributing towards stuff like Black Lives Matter, you're making the industry equitable for Black people, for females, you know what I mean? So like, I think the consumers are a lot smarter nowadays versus where ads and like and everything else has been done. It's always been within ourselves. So like now it almost feels like it's a two-way conversation. So like a lot of consumers are calling brands that are inauthentic out.
Right. So, Mbali, the question I want to direct it to you about consumers being smarter. Are consumers necessarily smarter, or do they have more access to media? Because from my perspective, you know, to use an old Ogilvy quote, the consumer's not some moron. It's your family, right? Are consumers necessarily sharper, or are they more empowered thanks to democratized media?
I think the world requires everybody to be smarter, right? I think the way the world is set up has required everybody to be a lot more discerning, but the empowerment is through the access, right? We are questioning so many things because all of a sudden we have more diverse access to knowledge. You know, the knowledge doesn't just come from your high school history teacher. That's not, you know, the basis of knowledge. They are thought leaders. They are people who are challenging culture so much more that it's coming into us now to be a lot more questioning. And I think it's requiring, I think authenticity is also such a fancy word. It's requiring us to be truthful. Can we be truthful as brands? Can we be truthful as communicators? And I think that is what we are being called to, is to just step back and to have a look around to say, what does it look like for me as a brand, for me as a communicator, to be truthful in this moment and in this space? So I definitely think that there's a lot more that we're able to learn, and our learning speed is a lot faster right now because of how much we consume. And that is what is making consumers a lot smarter. And the world is broken, right? There's so much beauty in the world, but there's so much brokenness. And the whole tension, we're constantly having to hold the tension of the beauty and the bad and the brokenness. And we're all existing in this hyper stressed state that requires us to reflect a lot more than potentially a lot of people were needing to when the world was simpler or a lot more disconnected.
Oh, wow. So Roanna Williams is asking a question, and I think it's hinged on creativity, which we've discussed a bit. But I'd like to double click on a point that she makes here. She says 2020 is demanding more creativity, but there's a lot of fear around that. And that results in pulling back on the very creativity that we're demanding. I want to double click on this idea of fear and pulling back, because Mbali, you are talking about the brokenness of the world, right? And you know how she calls out like fear-led or fear-driven thinking, and how it's impacting our ability to work and create. Let's talk about that pullback, that step back. Does it necessarily hold us back creatively, or is it possibly the springboard to rise above the fray, whatever the fray is? I think about us being in a perpetual state of crisis these days. So what's the value? What's the value of that step back? And what's the value, I think, or what does the fear teach us?
Would you? Yeah, that's a big question to me. A couple of points. First of all, I think we've got to appreciate that collectively, the value of brands, their revenue generating capability, is greater than the GDP of many countries. Right. Brands collectively have extraordinary power.
Quite powerful.
Are we using that power to fix this broken world? And we have a long way, which is a wonderful opportunity to use this incredible economic and social power brands to start fixing things. And to do that, we have to get out of our narrow perspective of just selling the chips.
Right.
Brands have to do more than selling the chips. And Nike's done an extraordinary job, just to acknowledge Nike, of celebrating excellence, celebrating performance. Right. And that's a very positive contribution. But I agree, our focus has to be, how do we fix a broken world? And again, the CEO of Unilever, I think, has been extraordinary to actually take that responsibility on board. He has said that because of the size of Unilever, we have a responsibility to fix the brokenness. Now, right. if all brands took that approach, it would change everything. It would change how we communicate. It would change how we measure our performance. And let's do away with all these silly CSI departments. Brands fundamentally must invest in society. Right. It's part of what a brand is. Don't just put it into a little department, right, which says, well, all the other departments don't care at all. Just go and speak to Mbali down at the CSI department, who's got the smallest budget. So I think we've got to say brands are unbelievably powerful. We have a broken world. Between getting governments to step up and brands to use their creativity to get beyond the fear and start fixing is a huge opportunity, and I have a lot of optimism of that potential.
Right. Wow. You touched on, Gordon, the myopic view. Mosito, this is the first thing we discussed. From where you are now, speaking to a young South African that is at Vega right now, looking to get into the industry, how do you advise them to grow their world?
Yeah, I mean, I think my own personal experience, I always give credit to my mother. I mean, she's always fostered a spirit of independence from us from a very young age. I mean, I was in boarding school from 9. So like I've always,
Whoa.
I wanted to get out of Mafeking when I was 9. And then when I was in Joburg, I knew the world is bigger than Joburg. You know, I wanted to study in the US. So I think a big part of it is visualizing and really like putting yourself in those situations. As we know, the world is a lot smaller than it ever was. There's access to, you know, like moving and following your dreams a lot more. But I think it starts with being brave and visualizing and knowing that you're not restricted by geography. Like I said, I'm from a small town, Mafeking in the Northwest, but I've always felt that I have a bigger role to play in this world, you know, bigger than what Mafeking allowed me to do, you know what I mean? And I think I'll give credit to Mafeking as well, because growing up in those days, we were just exposed to such a global outlook in terms of content, from music, art. So we've always had a global centric approach to life. So I think for me, that's the key. Like you have to like visualize yourself not being where you are and like not hamstring yourself by, you know, like by your geography. So
I think also just to build on that one as well, for me, there's the global, greater globe side, and I think there's also the Pan-African one. For me, I have a massive, you know, view, and I don't think as South Africans we see and are exposed, right, to the continent. I had traveled to Europe 10 years before I ever traveled to, you know, any country outside of Southern Africa. And that is a problem. And as soon as I did, there is so much to learn. I have learned so much more from engaging with tech companies and even my colleagues and our businesses on the rest of the continent who are in, you know, constrained environments, but their level of creativity, their level of entrepreneurship, their level of courage, their level of just smarts, it leaves us in the dust, guys. It honestly
and how you put that.
So in terms of this global perspective, I think also as a young person, have a look and see what is happening on the continent. If I had known when I was coming out of university that there's so much that's happening in Kenya, for example, in the tech business, I would have left, gone, figured it out. But I think there's, so the global definitely, but also the African perspective is such a powerful space for us to learn, especially if you have an inkling for entrepreneurship and for doing things that are difficult to do.
Mbali, you talk about the African perspective, right? Is it necessary to coin that African perspective, right? Should it not be commonplace? A couple of years ago, when I was working in an agency, you know, we were talking about having a Pan-African view, you know, translating the work in a Pan-African way. My question that I raised then is, hang on, what does that actually mean? Why do I need to have a special view on Africa? Am I not in Africa already?
Sure.
Like, so why am I treating it like a special chapter? And that perspective, I'm going to ask Gordon, after you respond to that question, is it necessary to have a deliberate kind of African perspective? Should it not be perspective, just perspective? Yeah. And Gordon, how is that also translating, I think, in the skills that we're developing for the future? Is it manifesting in the work that you do right now?
Yeah. So I think that there's something powerful about transforming language, right? Because I think the ability to transform language allows us to see where we are and the gap between where we are and where we should be. So your point is 100% correct to me that this should be perspective. However, it's not. That isn't the perspective that we have, right? So it even goes back to, let's think about Black Lives Matter, etc. All of a sudden, a lot more of us have language to describe things now that we've been experiencing, but we couldn't capture. So all of a sudden, social justice is something that we understand and have language to grab in terms of what we believe the world should be like. So I think it's kind of like a midpoint that allows us to say, okay, let's create the language for it so that we can start on the journey. Because if we remain where we are, if we remain comfortable, it makes it, we remain where we are. Whereas when we start becoming uncomfortable, when we start talking about things that are a little bit difficult to talk about,
Yes.
whatever it is, then we're moving ourselves in a certain direction. So I do think we need to name it and create, and what the language is probably not really that important, but what are the things that start to move us in a meaningful direction?
Gordon, how's that translating, like I said, from a Vega point of view, from a skills point of view, moving into the future? How does that come to life?
Firstly, I'd just like to say, Tumi, that listening to Mbali and Mosito just gives me such hope. And to come back to the Africa issue, I sincerely believe that Africa's time has come. England had its empire, which came and went. France had its empires. Europe all had their various empires. America's time came and is now going. I believe it is Africa's time. And I have always believed that Africa is the most creative continent in the world. We just have to unlock it. If you look at the music of Africa, the dance of Africa, the arts of Africa, the performance, the acting, the filmmaking, Africa, its time has come, and we need to take hold of it, because I do agree that it's not so much a global solution. I believe that Africa can lead a lot of these global initiatives. Now, to quickly answer your question, we are trying to give Vega students a perspective on Africa and discourage them, if they're going to travel, to go to the usual places, Paris or wherever else, and rather go to Africa. Where the experiences, I agree with Mbali, are unbelievable, so rich in many ways.
Yeah.
So with respect to my good friend now living in New York, all these civilizations they're on the wane. Africa's rising. Africa's rising. So we're trying to bring into the curricula a celebration of a lot of the great creative people who have come from Africa. I mean, modern music comes from Africa.
Yeah.
Rock and roll comes from Africa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I just wanted to double down on that in terms of the whole clarion call that time for Africa is now. I mean, I agree with that 100%. We're actually doing some pro bono work with an institute here called the Africa Center. It's a beautiful museum. They've got endowment from the Dangote Foundation, Mo Ibrahim, and like the whole repositioning of this particular place is transforming the narratives of Africa. Right? There's an old Ghanaian adage that says, if lions don't have the biographer, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter, right? So like we're literally living in a moment in time where the spotlight is definitely on Africa. Like we're seeing it from the arts, the music that Africa is inspiring in the globe, in the athletic space, all our athletes that have gone out there. So I think it's a creative space that is lagging behind. So like there's such a massive opportunity, and like the eyes of the world are fixed on Africa. So it really is our moment to stand up and be counted for right now in time.
I want to locate this in our current reality. So those of us that are practitioners here, and I'm going to read a question from Boniswa Pezisa, also a great mind. But I think she asks a very, very pertinent question in relation to this idea of the time is now, Africa, your time is now. She says, what's the panel's view on transformation of organizational leadership and culture which often drives fear and thereby curtailing the embrace of creativity and innovation. I want to start, I think, with you, Mbali, because from a client point of view, you are constantly observing agency and agency culture. So let's talk about the significance of organizational leadership and its ability to move this agenda forward, the agenda of transformation.
Yeah, and it's a massive run, right? We know that if we were to create a persona and say, give me a description, if the advertising industry or the ad agency was a person, describe him to me.
Wow.
Or describe her to me. What would come up, right? And it's things that Gordon also mentioned it. It's male, white, da 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 da. And now you imagine both the people that arrive in that environment to go and work in the industry, but also kind of outputs in terms of the work. So for us, it's one of the things that we've actually spoken out, linking to what Gordon was saying about our CEO, to say we are requiring our agencies to be a lot more accountable when it comes to who is sitting in the room when decisions are being made. What is the role of that? And we know that there's so much that actually still needs to be done in that area. But I think as brand custodians, we've seen, we have a lot more power than we've enabled ourselves to exercise when it comes to who is sitting in the room and who is providing input into the areas where we for our consumers, for the people we are aiming to serve. And we've had a few instances where we've needed to engage very actively in the space with our partners, and it gets a little bit uncomfortable, but it's really important that we continue to drive these conversations. And I think as clients, we have a lot of power actually when it comes to this. We don't just need to take whatever comes along, but that doesn't take the accountability out of the agency.
Yeah. I've got another question here from Tebogo, and Tebogo posed this question actually a while ago, but I think it's well located now. It's very simplistically put, but actually I'd like to put it to the panel again and see what comes out. We're talking about agency and client accountability, but also agency client partnership. Tebogo asks, what's the panel's view on the caliber of clients nowadays? Are they great at what they do? And very simply put, do they even know what they are meant to be doing? Now, I'm posing this question, and I'm going to draw from my own experience. When I was on the agency side, engaging with clients, I've often said you can pick up a client that has never actually delved into the world of agency. A certain type of entitlement sometimes is carried by that sort of client. What is your view on like some outstanding examples of client leadership in collaboration with agencies? By the way, we've got 5 minutes for this chat, and I'd like to do a roundup. So anyone can take this question, and then we're going to do our roundup.
Tumi, I'll give a quick response. There's been this battleground where agencies think clients don't really have an idea about creativity, and clients think agencies, when they come out of their weeded state, don't really understand the reality of the world. And both views are wrong. Clients are very smart. They run bigger businesses than agencies.
Right.
Hello, not marginally bigger, hugely bigger. So clients are very smart. They know how to run very big businesses. I think the problem you see in the halcyon days of advertising, David Ogilvy would speak with the CEO of Unilever.
Right.
That was the relationship. But we've gone down the value chain now, where agencies seem to have accepted that they can't speak to the CEO. An agency must be able to speak to the CEO.
Do you not think, though, that in order to have that place at the table, there's something important in C-suite language that we need to understand?
Correct. We have to better understand from an agency point of view the whole value chain of a business. We've got to spend far more time of being a partner. I think it was Mbali's point earlier, partner with the client. And you can't be a partner on just the the toe of the client. You've got to be a partner with the whole body. So agencies have to move up the value chain of the business to get that respect that, of course, the CEO will see the CEO of the ad agency. But we've really slipped down where a junior person in an ad agency speaks with a junior person in the marketing company. That's not necessarily going to make magic.
Yeah. So the 3 minutes that we have left, I'm actually going to use for the final question, and I think it leads us nicely into our wrap-up. Larry Kumalo asks, thoughts on the lack of mentorship in the industry. He layers it further by saying the lack of existing mentorship structures in ad agencies in particular keeps the power and therefore the work concentrated in the knowledgeable and experienced few that does not ready the next generation for the future. And so, I want to ask the panel in 1 minute each, how do we change this? How do we contribute towards mentorship in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that one. Mentorship is a big one for me. And I think for me, I think the lack of visibility of Black people within the space is the reason why there's such a dearth of talent, or Black talent, or people of color in the advertising space. So I think the onus is definitely on the Black guys that have been in the space to make themselves visible, to open themselves up for mentorship opportunities. I mean, I always say that you can't be what you can't see, right? I mean, like, if you look at, I mean, I was fortunate enough that there were guys ahead of me, Tidiso, people that have walked the path, guys that had always been open to mentoring young guys and sharing their expertise. So I think the onus is definitely on the older generation, not only to be visible, but to also open themselves up to mentor the young guys.
Quite powerful. Mbali? Same question.
Yeah, I think for me, there's probably so much that we're missing, particularly in those younger people in the teams. Like Gordon was saying, the junior person in the agency dealing with the junior person in the business. And we're saying, actually, what is the key issue of the business of agency is they don't understand the business of the client. So coaching and mentorship even existing at that level. If we're saying clients don't understand creative and we're saying agencies don't understand business, how do we start that and actually engaging and teaching each other that space from when someone, each of these people are 24 years old, sitting on both sides. And what does that begin to bring to the surface versus trying to teach someone when they get to being a BUD, for example, or a creative director, and now we're trying to get them to understand the client's business. Now they're a marketing manager and we're trying to get them to understand the creative process. What would it look like for us to translate that from the beginning stage actively and quite intentionally?
Right. So Gordon, I'm going to kick it to you, and it's 11 o'clock on the dot. So this is us wrapping up. The final comment on passing the baton.
Mentoring and coaching is definitely a huge solution. Agencies have been infamous for not mentoring. They do coach, but not mentoring. So I think agencies have to take on board that they need to become learning organizations. And there's a lot of literature on becoming a learning organization. But for them to do it, because I bumped heads many times trying to do it, you have to change the metrics. You have to change the metrics,
Wow.
and you have to weight the metrics on development of people.
Wow, that's quite powerful. On that note, weighting the metrics on developing people, thank you so, so much. I wish we had more time. We've come to the end of this discussion. It's, 1 minute past 11. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the panel. This has been amazing. And we are still getting questions streaming in, which hopefully we can provide answers for further down the line. Have a great day, everybody.